Welcome to the Resolution Room, a space for reflection and meaningful dialogue. I'm Dr. Nishay Lowe. My work sits at the intersection of leadership, communication, and conflict transformation, helping people see challenge as a teacher, not a threat. Each episode invites you to look closer, think deeper, and lead with greater intention. Because resolution isn't the absence of difficulty. It's learning to move through it on purpose. Let's get into it. We often call people resilient when what we're really seeing is survival under impossible conditions. In this episode, I sit down with Sandra Martinez Ramirez, an international development leader with experience in South Sudan, Guatemala, and beyond, to unpack the difference between resilience and endurance. Together, we explore why celebrating grit without changing unjust systems can be harmful, how grief and rest belong in the resilience conversation, and what true resilience looks like when it's rooted in justice, care, and connection.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Martinez. I'm from Colombia. I'm a political scientist with a master's in international affairs, and I have worked the last 7 years in humanitarian and conflict-affected areas in countries like Ethiopia, South Sudan, Guatemala, and Colombia. I have worked closely with different stakeholders that include mostly victims of violations to human rights, humanitarian law, and refugee law in different countries, specifically to women, children, human rights defenders, and also journalists. So yeah, thank you, Nashay.
Amazing. And so let's start off by hearing a little bit more about your personal journey and humanitarian work. Like, how did it all start?
Well, I think everything started somewhere in 2014 during my master's program. I remember I took a class on transitional justice that I really liked, and I studied a lot of cases of countries affected by armed conflict and violence, and how this impacted in a differentiated way vulnerable groups like women, the elderly, the children. So that realization sparked something in me. So it was after that course that I decided to draft my master's thesis on transitional justice in Central America, specifically in El Salvador and Guatemala. Even I went to both countries and conducted field work. So it was after that field work that I decided okay, I would like to go abroad and witness firsthand, these difficult scenarios, but also I want to be able to support those groups that are in vulnerability, like I said before. And it was, I think, 4 years later, when I moved abroad, I moved to Guatemala in 2018. So that's where everything started.
Wow, that's amazing. And I mean, I feel like most of us, again, read headlines, we see stories and they're heartbreaking, and you feel in your heart you want to do something sometimes. But what was it for you, I guess? Was there a certain moment where you decided that you're even willing to put yourself in dangerous positions to do this work?
When I went to El Salvador and Guatemala, I saw the suffering of those victims. I was able to sense how, despite the injustice and the unfair of the system, these people were looking for justice, and that's the moment where I realized, okay, I want to do something. I want to help those people. Even I'm not sure what the result will be, but I want to be able at least to make an effort to help those people because I want to speak for them, I want to speak for them. So that's what I think my revealing moment to move abroad and do this, or at least try,
Yeah, I'm actually curious. What made you want to work on issues going on in other countries rather than locally in Colombia?
In 2014, so my country, although it has an armed conflict, for 60 years, we were not already in that, stage of negotiating between the parties to the conflict. So I couldn't study. And I wanted, as a Latin America, I said, okay, let me just go and see how can I provide some kind of support without leaving my region. So it was mainly the reason, because there was nothing much. It was quite new, the process. I remember that by that time, talking about transitional justice in Colombia, it was a very new topic. And I remember when discussing with my thesis advisor about it, he told me that I could go and study something related, somewhere close in the region, and still apply the best practices to my country when it was the time. So from my master thesis about Salvador and El Guatemala, I also wrote some conclusions regarding how the best practices can be, adjusted or adapted to the context in Colombia.
You've worked in some of the world's most challenging contexts. So, what does the word resilience mean to you when you hear it in those settings?
That's a difficult question. I reflected a lot about it because of my journey in difficult and like challenging scenarios. But I would say that resilience to me is that like inner capacity that all of us have to face like difficult or challenging situations and still being able to move forward. So it's also about growing, adapting continually, even when things feel overwhelming. But it's not only about enduring hardship. There should be some transformation. Like for me to call it resilience, there should be a transformation of that capacity into something else. It can be like healing, it can be strength, or like whatever you can call it. So this transformation is essential for me when I'm talking about resilience.
I love that. I love adding the transformational part to it because we use that loosely. And I realize even in the show, we bring up that concept a lot, but haven't really taken the time to properly define it. And so this was that. That's a perfect definition. And can you think of a moment from your time in South Sudan or Guatemala that shifted your perspective on what resilience really is?
Yes. Look, I moved to Guatemala in 2018 and I was working there with human rights defenders involved in cases of transitional justice and land tenure. So one of my first tasks was to accompany a group of 36 indigenous women that were victims of sexual violence during the armed conflict in Guatemala to a court hearing in the capital city. So I remember one of these first hearings when we arrived to the room, I could feel a lot of tension and discomfort because the victims were there, but the perpetrators were there, but also the relatives and families of these perpetrators were present. So I could see like a lot of tension. But at the same time, I remember looking at those women and I could see through their faces and their eyes, their dignity, their strength. And from that moment, I realized like, okay, despite like more than 30 years of injustice, these women continue fighting and looking for justice. And this is what really resilience is for me. It's not only about enduring hardship. I recognize that these women went through a lot, but regardless of that, they had that strength and capacity. They transformed that pain into something else. And they were there present at this hearing, with their faces and their dignity intact. They didn't hide at all. So that was like very revealing for me.
I love that. It reminds me of a similar moment I had in South Korea, and we got to visit the home where the quote unquote comfort women of World War II were staying, and hearing their stories. Like it's one of those beautiful moments too, because I don't speak Korean, especially not fluently. I know some words, and they don't speak English. And the amount of communication that happened between us just by looking at each other's eyes, you can feel both the pain and just I think they felt very seen and understood and just grateful that we came to hear their story and just learn from them. So that feeling that you're talking about, I know exactly what you mean. It's so powerful and it transcends language and really just makes us feel connected. It's insane. Love that. Okay. So I like to always define terms when we're using things here and not make assumptions. We brought up transitional justice a couple times. Can you define what that is?
Transitional justice, I mean, from my understanding, is all the mechanisms, policies, programs, activity aimed at three main things or objectives. First, like access to justice. Second, knowing the truth. And then guarantees of non-repetitions. These are like the three main things that I keep in mind. There are many definitions also adjusted to the context, but for me, I would say like these three are the main aspects.
Perfect. Thank you. And so, in your experience, how does survival mode show up in communities under crisis, whether from conflict, poverty, or systemic injustice?
Well, from my experience, like survival mode often shows up in a community as people focusing on immediate needs, like it might be food, safety, shelter, while putting emotions, feelings, and even like long-term goals on hold. I know it's a way of coping, but it can also hide or mask like deeper trauma and make resilience like harder to build. So over time, if you stay in a constant state of alert, I truly believe that that can limit the capacity of a community to imagine themselves beyond crisis. So they can sometimes feel like they are stuck in this present that they don't like. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we were talking about the definition of resilience earlier, one way I think a lot of people tend to look at resilience is as survival just in itself. And so, what do you think the danger is in labeling survival as resilience?
I mean, there are many things when we label survival as resilience. And one of the main risks is that we might be overlooking the emotional, psychological toll of simply getting by and the pain that is behind it. So survival is often doing whatever it takes, to get through the day, sometimes without support or even dignity, like very harmful conditions. Resilience, on the other hand, involves like recovery, agency, and hope. So if we don't make that distinction, if we don't differentiate, we might fail to provide the necessary tools or resources for a community or to people that they need to truly rebuild their life or to thrive. So yeah, that's one of the risks that I could see.
Absolutely. And what do you think are some of the unintended negative consequences when we celebrate people's ability to endure hardship rather than challenging the systems that create the hardships in the first place?
Well, I think that when we celebrate people's ability to endure hardship, we risk glorifying suffering instead of questioning why it exists. It can shift the attention away from unjust systems and place the whole responsibility on individuals to be strong rather than on a society to be fair. So this narrative, I believe, may discourage like system change, normalize inequality, and silence those who want to speak up, not because they lack of resilience, but because they deserve better conditions, or maybe they don't have the safe space to speak up about it.
And building on that, then, so you've witnessed communities carrying grief quietly. So, what effects on individuals or groups have you seen when they're forced to keep enduring without space to process?
Well, I have seen many communities to carry grief quietly, specifically in places affected by conflict or systemic violence. So when people are asked to keep enduring without space to process that grief, that pain, it definitely has a deep emotional cost. For example, I have seen that individuals may suppress their pain just to survive, but with the time, that silence can turn into disconnection from themselves, from the others, and even from their sense of purpose. And in groups, what I have seen is that this can create a culture where suffering is normalized or even romanticized and it's never addressed. So people stop expecting support from others, and that can lead sometimes to burnout, mistrust, or even lack of hope. So I have seen that sometimes in communities, like strength is admired, but vulnerability is hidden because there is simply no room for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that resilience is not about pushing through. It's also about having the space to pause, to mourn, and to be a human, Like what we call resilience can become a mask. And I believe that creating a space for grief is not luxurious. It's a necessary part of healing and also on rebuilding, and of course, part of resilience.
Absolutely. And when we talk about the definition of resilience, I think similarly, we tend to have a very narrow definition of what strength is or looks like. Again, glorifying some of the more negative consequences of what we misconstrue as strength. So, how do exhaustion and silence get mistaken for strength?
I think it's very easy, to confuse the three of them like in real life because they might look alike and the difference can be very thin sometimes. So if we live in a culture that normalize like pain, suffering, uh, and praise, pushing and, getting through no matter what. So I think it's very easy, to mistaken the three of them. For example, when somebody is handling a difficult situation and the person like keeps quiet or silent, we say, okay, that person is emotionally strong or mature, and we praise that. But we don't know if that silence could mean like fear, lack of trust, isolation. So I think at the end it's very easy to get confused between the three of them. But one thing for me is very important when like trying to identify what resilience is. And for me, it includes vulnerability. It's the courage to rest, to speak up, and to set boundaries. And recognizing this help us shift from glorifying silence and exhaustion to valuing sustainable resilience and also human dignity.
I love that you brought up vulnerability. That's an underrated superpower, especially in resilience, but just getting through any type of daily conflict. So what does it look like when resilience is built not just individually, but collectively?
Well, I think that when resilience is built collectively, it looks like shared responsibility, mutual care, and systems that support healing and growth. Instead of individuals carrying the weight alone, communities come together to create like safe spaces, share resources, and validate each other's experiences. So in a humanitarian or a crisis context, this might mean like peer support networks, trauma-informed leaderships, or policies that prioritize, mental health and dignity. So collective resilience also includes, for me, storytelling, when people share their struggles and victories, because it builds connection and also hope. So it's not about surviving alone, it's about transforming together. So when resilience is built collectively, it becomes sustainable. So it shifts from being a personal burden to a shared strength rooted in solidarity and trust.
Mm. Amazing. And can you think of a specific example where you saw systemic support, like resources, leadership policies, anything like that, that shifted a community from survival into resilience?
Yes, I would like to share like a very personal moment, Nasha, if that's okay with you, because I think this might help like the audience also and like feel it maybe more close. So, when I was in South Sudan, I was there for 4 years as a human rights officer, helping like victims of human rights violations, etc. And I remember December 2023, after 3 years, I was worn out. I must confess, and I have to be honest. Conditions were very tough there, like the food was limited. I survived malaria and typhoid. Also, the type of work that I was doing was distressing. So I remember by that time I was kind of depressed also. I wanted to go home. Like South Sudan from Colombia is like 2 days flight, so it's very far. And I remember I talked to my supervisor by that time, and I told her like, look, I feel this way. I want to quit. She was surprised. She was not expected that. And she told me like, look, Sandra, thank you for being honest and vulnerable with me. Like you can be in that way. But I want you to suggest that you go home, you take a long break. So I took like almost 2 months break here in Colombia. And there you spend time with your family, with your loved ones. And then you think really well if you really want to like quit or not. So once you come back, you can just like tell me that you have made a decision and it's fine. I will accept whatever it takes. So I remember that moment with all my heart, because that was like, I don't know, that was revealing for me, because that woman just like gave me resources and tools, to move from survival mode to resilience. So I thank her a lot, because she was a safe space for me. She allowed me to be vulnerable, but also that was very valuable for me by that time, because we live in a culture when you have to work 24/7. Rest is not well seen. So I really respected what she did for me. And that moment of like compassionate and trauma-informed leadership, I think was like essential to me. And that's something I learned from her, and that really shifted my perspective about what survival is. And for sure, she gave me the tools, like she gave me the necessary tools to transform that into a strength. And thanks to her leadership, helped me a lot to move from that to resilience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing such a personal story. I mean, we appreciate that here. And so that kind of makes me think of something not talked about too much is the impact that this work has on the people doing the work, the human rights officers and humanitarian officers. You're there in very sensitive areas, sometimes dangerous areas. And again, you have your own families back home and you have things to deal with. I'm sure you miss birthdays, you miss all these things. Like there's a lot going on that I think we don't think about. And you can have secondary post-traumatic stress for yourself when you're witnessing so many things, right? And so besides taking that bit of time off, how have you learned to take care of yourself while committing to the well-being of others throughout your professional experiences?
That's a really good question. And I learned through the hard way, but after this story, like very personal story that I share, I learned that if I want to help other people, if I want to take care of them, I really need to take care of myself first. There is no other way to do it, you know? So there were a few things that I implemented. So I was able, to continue doing my job because I was there for 4 years and I really love my job. I really love like helping people, supporting them, et cetera, et cetera. So there were a few things that I incorporated, just like to keep going, but to transforming that capacity into a strength. So I will say that setting boundaries between like work and like my personal life helped me a lot, because during that personal or like free time, I used to keep close to my family, to my friends, to some like good colleagues. Other thing that I implemented was like moving my body, if you like swimming, walking, playing, wherever. So there I used to walk a lot. I play basketball. I used to go to the gym because it was also a way of releasing all the energy that I had during the day. And at the end, it made me feel good. It made me feel like, okay, I'm doing something good for myself, because I need to be healthy in order to be able to do my job properly. Because let me tell you, when I got malaria and typhoid, oh my God, I couldn't even do my job. I was just like laying on a bed, or not even my bed. I was at the hospital there like for 2 weeks each time,
Oh my God.
like feeling very bad, but also, of course, I had to stop my work. There's no way to do it. So like the main lesson for me is like, and I want to share this and be very like emphatic, is like, you need to take care of yourself. You need to prioritize yourself in order to be able to help the others. If you're a humanitarian worker, if you are just like doing like a work that is distressing or that requires a lot from you, you really need to take care of yourself. This is a must. I think it's not optional, because even if you don't do it because you think you're strong enough, I think at some point your body, will feel it, and your mind also. And that's something that happened to me, because as I mentioned, I was born out in 2023 after 3 years.
You said it at the end, like your body will tell you sooner or later if you don't do it yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah. So many of our listeners aren't necessarily in South Sudan or Guatemala or other places you've been, but they're navigating workplaces, families, or communities where people are stretched thin. So what lessons that you've learned internationally carry across contexts?
Well, even if someone isn't working in South Sudan or Guatemala or any other like difficult context, I think the core lesson is the same. Resilience isn't just about like individual strength, it's about the support system around us. Whether it's a workplace, family, or a community, people thrive when leadership is compassionate, when rest is respected, and where there is a space just to be human. So when someone feels like seen or supported, they are more likely to recover, to grow, and to contribute meaningfully. So no matter the context, we can all ask, are we creating environments that help people to move from just surviving to truly living? And this is something I want to share with the audience, that question.
I love that. And so what small practice can anyone adopt, whether in leadership or daily life, to stop glorifying survival and start nurturing resilience?
So I would say that instead of praising people just for surviving like tough time, we can support like real resilience with small actions. For example, start by asking how someone really feels, not just saying like, oh my God, you are so strong, you are doing good, keep pushing, even if it's just listening, that really helps. Also, speaking up when you see unfair situations at work, within your family or community. Also, as I said before, take care of yourself, have a space to rest, to set boundaries, and don't feel guilty or afraid of, needing or asking for support. And finally, I think celebrating growth, not just endurance. So these small steps can build like a culture where people thrive and not just survive. I mean, it's a long journey, but I think that with these like small like steps or like daily actions, like we can make a change in our families and communities, of course.
Absolutely. So I always like to end with a signature resolution question, because this is the resolution room. So when you think about the conflicts you've seen between survival and resilience, what's one lesson you carry with you about how we can create systems that don't just demand endurance, but invite people to truly live?
Well, one lesson that's really stayed with me is this: resilience shouldn't be the price people pay for dignity. Too often, like systems are built assuming that people will just endure, push through, survive without asking why they have to. But what if we flip that? What if we create spaces that offer support before crisis, that make rest and safety normal and not luxury? So I have seen how powerful it is when we listen to communities, when we remove barriers and we build systems that don't just demand strength, they invite people to truly live. So that's the shift we all needed.
Beautiful. So what's next for you?
Well, actually, after being in the field nonstop for 6 years, I think, like in hardship duty stations in Africa, but also in Central America, last year I decided to take a gap year to recover mentally, physically, emotionally, to spend time with my family, my friends, but also to think, what do I want to do next? Do I want to continue doing the same? It's making me happy. It is worth it. Do I want to continue like working on human rights issues or humanitarian issues? And the answer is yes. This is my passion. This is what I really love. This is something that feels good, in my heart. So I know I'm doing the right thing because the job that I have been carried out, I have done it with all my heart, even without the difficult situations and all the challenges that I face. So at the moment, I think it's a good time, to work on Latin America issues so far. So I started the fellowship on criminal intelligence in Latin America, mainly to help women and children affected by violence with an international organization. So far, I think it's the time to focus on Latin America. Somehow there are like a lot of good practices that we can implement from Africa, and adjust it to the context here. Yeah, I think like after 6 years, 6 or 7 years now, I have all the resources and the tools, to take care of myself in order to be able to take care of the others. And yeah, I think I feel excited about what is next. I don't know for how long I'm going to be here in Latin America. I don't know. But what I know for sure is that I want to continue helping people, supporting them, speaking up for the ones who don't have voices or don't have like a safe space to speak up about like different topics.
That's so amazing. On behalf of the international community, we thank you for your service.
Thank you, Nashe. I feel so honored, really. I'm so happy and excited. And thanks for doing this. Like, thanks for creating like safe spaces to talk about it. Because I know it's not easy to find these spaces, in this century. Like, it's not easy sometimes. Like, I'm afraid of being judged, or like feel like strange because I'm talking about vulnerability, burnout, resilience, strength. I think it's not normalized yet because we still live in a culture of survival sometimes. So here, I think you're making a difference, and I really appreciate for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And lastly, can you let everyone know where to follow you in your work?
Yes, I think people can follow me on LinkedIn at Sandra Martinez Rodriguez. They can find me there, and I'm sharing, my professional journey there, some personal thoughts, and always happy to connect with people with the same, values and opinions, and even when different ones, I'm happy to discuss.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you.
Sandra reminds us that resilience isn't about how much we can endure. It's about whether the world around us is willing to change so endurance isn't required. We often praise people for surviving what should never have been asked of them. But true resilience doesn't come from pushing through. It comes from being supported, seen, and allowed to rest. It's collective, not individual, rooted in justice, care, and connection. As leaders, colleagues, and communities, our challenge is to stop glorifying grit and start building systems that make thriving possible. Because the goal isn't to keep people standing under impossible weight, it's to remove the weight altogether. Real resolution begins when survival is no longer the measure of strength, but the beginning of a story about shared humanity and sustainable change. Thank you for joining me in the Resolution Room. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, please consider sharing it with someone else who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. It really helps more people find these conversations. You can explore our wearable wisdom collection at the Mind Shop or visit lowinsights.com to learn more about our work and upcoming projects. All of the details are in the show notes below. And until next time, keep building in the quiet because that's what will carry you forward.